Good morning. Thanks for checking in on today's demonstration. I finished making these bowls the other day and they're at a perfect leather hard stage for decorating with slip this morning. I'm using a stamping technique with a sponge stamp made from a piece of sponge or foam cut with a small scissors. I'm using a floral motif inspired by Japanese fabric, and it's going to have a number of layers on each of these pieces. I usually do 3 to 5 layers of decorating techniques, and I'll describe them all as I go. I'm going to take you through to the glazed ware, and we'll have some finished images of the fired pieces, I hope. So using a white slip base, I make my slips a little bit thick, and I dab them on the table to get a nice even coat on the stamp, and then just touching lightly, rocking gently, maybe touch it twice if you need to, and reload the sponge stamp as you go with a little bit of slip. The slip is a nice thickness, so it holds its shape while it's being stamped. It's not running down into the bowl, and you do that by just taking some of the excess water off of the slip as it settles. And so I'm going to scatter this pattern around the edge of these leather hard bowls. I'm not interested in making a very organized or regular pattern. I like when they're scattered about and running off the edge a little bit as well. So each bowl is going to be slightly different than the next, but they're going to belong to the same family once they're all fired. We rather hope our customers appreciate the qualities of handmade, and that includes right through the firing process, where variations in glaze as well as in the maker's process show through. So stamping, I'll lay out all these bowls and stamp a number of them and let the slip get to a leather hard stage along with the bowl, so that I can do the next step. I'm going to stamp this bowl just a little bit more, and then we'll go on to the next step. The next step is doing a sgraffito line around each of the bowls. Once that slip sets up and the shine of wetness starts to go away, you know you're at about the right stage to do incised lines. You can do any kind of mark making you want. In addition, I like to give a hint of tracing around each of these motifs. That allows some definition of the image. By carving into the clay, it creates a little bit of a dark shadow, which I think you can see in the pieces on the table, and that is going to stay through the whole process. That incised line is going to give the glaze a little place to pool, and perhaps the glaze will break or get a little bit thinner around the edges of this pattern, and that highlights this pattern in a different way than the brightness of the white slip underneath the glaze. So once that's done, I would go around and do all of these bowls this way and let them dry just a little bit more. You know that there are burrs on these right from doing the sgraffito line, and I usually try and talk about not picking at burrs. But once they get a little bit leather hard, and this is a pretty clean line from the tool I use, a wire stylus tool. It's a little bit of a chisel shape, so it leaves a very clean line rather than doing this kind of work with a needle tool that's round and which would require more scrubbing. I'm using a dry sponge just to very lightly go over where I did the sgraffito marks, and that takes those burrs off and leaves a nice bit of edge that I won't need to scrub later before bisquing with a green scrubby, or after bisquing with a piece of sandpaper, which tends to be kind of harsh on the pottery. So I'll go around and do all of those. After they're bisque fired, you can see the white slip and the sgraffito marks on each of the bowls. So I have applied a white glaze to a bowl that's already been bisque fired, and I have a little bit of a contrasting glaze in a separate tub. So I'm going to rinse my sponge. I'm going to rinse my sponge from the slip. I want to use the same sponge because I want it to be very close to the same size that I'm already using. I'm going to dab it into the glaze and then very gently, I don't want to squeeze it too hard or load it too much so that the glaze runs down the piece, although sometimes that's just part of the process, and I can let that go. But if I need to double stamp it to make sure there's enough glaze on that, I can see the outline of where I did the slip pattern because I did that sgraffito mark over it. And you can see where the contrasting slip and sgraffito mark lets me apply the stamp right over it. I may have said I'm not very particular about this being an exact match because the glazes are going to melt, and this contrasting glaze is actually a bit of a blue, and the white is a very lively kind of surface, and I know from testing that these two glazes are going to fit very nicely together, and there'll be some movement in the glaze as it fluxes and melts. So I've done white slip stamp, I've done sgraffito around the edge, I've glazed the whole piece, and I've applied a contrasting slip already. That's 4 steps. What am I going to do? One more step. I've got a little bit of iron oxide just in water and a small brush, and there's a contrasting dark dot in the center of this flower, and I am hoping that iron oxide melts into the glaze, and that the darker glaze melts onto the white, and that the whole thing moves and melts into the center of the bowl, towards the center of the bowl, just a little bit as it's fired. So we'll keep our fingers crossed for the next firing, where these are going to go into the kiln, and we'll see how they turn out. Thanks for watching.